to support UN-based peacekeeping and peace. Oh, okay.
Oh, well, that's not a buyer.
Okay, great. We love to have the private sector involved. Yeah, that's great.
This is a business card. Do you have a card?
Yes, of course. Yeah, we're trying to do more and more with the private sector. So,
And also set up like a coffee shop. You either come to my office or I come here.
I would love that. I will send you a note. We'll do that. I'm traveling tonight for a week, and then I'll be back.
Hello everyone. This is Skylar Wang. I'm the Vice President of Bank of America Merrill Lynch. I'm the Investment Advisor and Portfolio Manager. I'm very happy to join today's event hosted by International Peace Institute. The topic is about, we're talking about the environment peaceful. I think it's very important, not only in the political reasons, as also in the economic reasons. So when the world we cooperate in a very peaceful environment, the lawyer set up saying we have a different rules and regulations to help our world maintain this safety. It also can help the whole world, especially different countries, to cooperate each other to have a more growth in economic way.
Peace TV reporters have been active at the UN headquarters since 2010, the age of former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. They are often invited to gather pictures and news about high-level meetings and events at the UN headquarters. We usually report live on the scene the events of dozens of countries, including the US, France, the UK, Israel, Germany, Russia, Egypt, Kuwait, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Morocco, and the EU at the UN headquarters and their residences in New York. Our news reports have, in part, kept the international community up to date with the work of different governments so that people everywhere will know the great efforts and contributions of the UN to world peace, international affairs, and multilateralism.
She's from
25 years at POC and the UN Security Council, challenges and opportunities. I try to keep the balance, but the challenges seem to be quite high these days. Many thanks to the Permanent Mission of Switzerland to the United Nations, our co-host today, in partnership with the Permanent Missions of the Republic of Mozambique and the United Kingdom, as well as the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, and the Norwegian Refugee Council, NRC, thank you to all. This year, as you all are no doubt aware, marks 25 years since the Security Council first recognized protection of civilians as a matter of international peace and security. The Council held its first open debate on POC on February 12, 1999, noting that, quote, civilians now account for the vast majority of casualties in armed conflict and are increasingly directly targeted by combatants and armed elements. Stemming from this 1999 debate, the Council requested the Secretary General to begin regular reporting on the protection of civilians. And later that year, the Council issued the first explicit mandate for a UN peacekeeping operation to protect civilians in Sierra Leone, UNAMSL. Ever since, UNAMSL has served as a template for subsequent POC mandates, which are now a bedrock of UN peacekeeping. As has been noted by the Secretary General, POC has become the yardstick on which mission performance is measured. Over the past 25 years, the Council has also issued many thematic resolutions related to POC, and I understand another one is in the works, including condemning attacks on journalists, humanitarian personnel, healthcare workers, and civilian infrastructure, and more. Overall, The norm of protection has become deeply embedded, not only within the Security Council mandates or peacekeeping operations, but throughout the entire UN system. Just this past March, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights issued the long-awaited UN Agenda for Protection, noting that protection puts people and their needs at the center of the work of the United Nations. Protection underpins everything the United Nations does. Yet, 25 years from that first POC mandate, it is difficult to claim enduring success. The hard reality of today's political and security context has left the protection of civilians at grave risks. In contexts like Sudan, Gaza, Ethiopia, Ukraine, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, among others, civilians continue to be intentionally targeted by warring parties and are affected by flagrant violations of international humanitarian and human rights laws. These violations have devastating consequences for civilians in conflict settings, but they are also symptoms of a worrying and broader challenge for the normative frameworks that underpin the very stability of the entire international system. And in some cases, the challenge is coming from Council members themselves, whether directly or indirectly involved in violations. So, what does this all mean? What are the trends? And what is to be done? Small task for our conversation today. We're going to talk about it, and I am really privileged to have this group of panelists to speak with. We're hoping to have this as an interactive conversation. And so the format is I will give each panelist one question to kick off the conversation with a brief 3-minute answer. And then we'll have a discussion with additional questions, followed by a Q&A from the floor, so prepare your questions yourselves. And then we will turn to closing remarks from Her Excellency Pascal Varswell, Permanent Representative of Switzerland, the United Nations, who I should say I'm really grateful to have here because I'm sure there is a lot to be talked about at the Security Council this morning. It's been quite a busy 24 hours.
Needs the ability of militaries to wage and win wars. In a sense, you are trained that any legitimate or acceptable interpretation of the law must always take into account that if the law is interpreted in a manner that is overly restrictive, the law would collapse. This embodies, in my view, both a promise and a threat. The promise is that there will be some law in war, and the threat is that if you ask for too much protection, you will ultimately get no protection whatsoever. It is with this mentality that I think many IHL experts have experienced the last 7 months. For many of us, I think this period has been characterized almost by a kind of split screen. On the one side are unbearable, truly unbearable images of death, destruction, and suffering, as well as for many in this room in particular, messages from friends and colleagues of a human crisis of a speed and scale rarely witnessed by even the most hardened and experienced humanitarian colleagues. On the other side of the screen have been scenes where spokespeople for many governments are seemingly unable to string together a simple sentence answering the basic question of whether any IHL violations are being committed by the party they are supporting.
It's definitely not just that. I think POC is a discussion that takes place weekly at the Security Council through adoption of statements, through discussion around context-specific thematic briefs, and I think this is also something that shows how the commitment of the Council is on this particular issue. There's a willingness to understand better the deeper impact of conflict, how it affects civilians, and how IHL can and should protect better. I think it's also interesting to see that, unfortunately, as texts are adopted, the reality on the ground cannot be far away from those ideals. And this is really what we see, that unfortunately the implementation on ground is lacking, and while it creates their capacity to raise attention to those dangerous practices, to the improvement of some states, sometimes it happens, we see changes. We also see that there's a problem really in terms of bringing that to the improvement of protection of civilians concretely. We don't just, what Naz mentioned is important, we see as a challenge, of course, the growing elasticity in the interpretation of IHL. For us, it's important to see that everyone agrees to the ideal of IHL, but when it comes to implementation, there's a tendency to adapt everyone's reading to its own objective, which is not necessarily the protection of civilian and reduction of suffering on the ground. In particular, the issue around the conduct of hostilities language could be and should be improved. One very concrete element is that prevention and precaution can be taken before the conflict in a preventive way, with trying to bring constant care to civilian and civilian objects. Those are elements very clearly stated in protection in IHL treaties, Article 57 of the additional protocol number 1, and customary law as well is very clear on this, to try to reduce this arm constantly and not during the peak of the hostilities. We have a lot of elements that show as well that POC discussion and text are somehow one step behind the realities of what's.
So the changing nature of conflicts. I would distinguish 4 elements where I would see conflicts, let's say, change in its nature and evolve, not in a good way, unfortunately. First and foremost, the protracted nature of conflicts. ICRC has the very good statistic that is really valid right now. I mean, we see an increase in the length of the conflicts, where they stay. When the conflict starts, it's extremely hard to even know when it will stop. And some people today, and I talk about the Ukraine-Russia war, people will say, why it should stop? Because I want justice for my country or justice for my country. So there's not even a question of stopping a conflict today. And this is extremely, extremely consequential for civilians at 2 levels. First of all, protracted conflicts means extended negative consequences on civilians' lives and on the infrastructures. They are not repaired, there is no economy. So basically, if you don't have water today, for the next 20 years, you don't have access to healthy water, you don't have schools running, people are scared even to go and do their shopping. So the protracted nature has a direct and immediate impact, short-term and long-term, on civilians. The second criteria for me is the type of weapons that are being used today and the way we use them. It seems like we are completely free from any mental barriers or psychological barriers. We can use whatever we have, basically. So I go on Amazon or AliExpress and I buy 20 drones and I send them. And it's very easy. So now we are using cheap drones, ballistic missiles, 1-ton bombs on infrastructures. Like 1-ton bombs. I mean, I spent 10 years of my life in conflict zones. I can tell you a 1-ton bomb is insanely horrendous. And this is on a daily basis. We have armed actors shooting to ships in Bab-el-Mandeb area for them to block. Then, of course, the reaction comes. So we have the type of weapons that are being used, AI-enabled weapons, blind weapons, heavy artillery from the early 20th century. And this has, of course, a direct consequence on civilians. It creates a sense of constant fear. There is no place safe. Today, civilians, when they're in a conflict, there are no place safe. And for those, or all of us who are in conflict zones, we always have pockets of safety. Today, it's impossible. Wherever you go, you will be hit. And I think this is something that is extremely worrying. And I link to that the very lucrative business of arms selling. Now, countries are extremely proud because business is a bit difficult post-COVID, but the weapon selling is pretty good. Last year, 2.4 trillion US dollars were basically made based on the weapon business. And people are asking, we need to make an effort ourselves in adapting the language to the ground. So using religious frameworks, cultural traditions, using what exists already and make a reference. I give an example, IHL was not created in 49. The first religious code in the Hindu religion, the Bhagavad Gita, is 4,000 years old. And it has the main elements, the key elements of IHL. And this does not only address to armed groups or just top leaders. For me, it's to everyone who's on the ground, communities, self-protection communities, I think is a top priority. They should be actors of their own change and their own protection. So targeted trainings, targeted, let's say, increased knowledge should be addressing armed groups, military, communities, because they are part of the social fabric of a given conflict. We need to look at it from an exhaustive point of view, not only from just a targeted actor. They are all living together in the same family. In Mali, for example, in the same family, and I saw it. You have one brother working for the military, one brother working for the jihadi groups, and the sister who is leading an NGO to protect women. In the same family. So all of those need to understand what is IHL, but from their own point of view, to avoid simple and direct rejection. It's about adherence and building respect of the norms from within the social fabric of a given country.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. So now we'll turn to OCHA. We wanted to kind of continue this conversation around the normative frameworks of POC, but also OCHA is obviously intimately engaged on the ground. From your view, how can the UN specifically help to better implement these normative frameworks on the ground when it comes to protection?
Thank you very much, and really happy to be here. A lot has been said, so I'll try not to repeat what's been said. I'm really grateful to IPI and everyone who's been part of this. POC Week is very dear to my heart. I started in Darfur as OCHA's first legal protection officer under Jan Egeland, because he believed fundamentally that we needed to, at that time, 20 years ago, change the way we did business and some of the things that were happening at the time. To think that Darfur then was a Mickey Mouse compared to Darfur today. And the complete disregard, if I may, of civilian life and the loss of life. It's just incredible. It's unfathomable. But we need to first acknowledge the achievements of POC and what it's done, the Geneva Conventions at the time when we forget. Let me run you through a few things. UN peacekeeping operations have saved many lives. And here I'm talking from a UN perspective. Unmissed POC sites that really saved some 200,000 ITPs in the height of the crisis a few years ago. The work that the missions do, monitoring and reporting on grave violations against children and engagement with parties listed in various Secretary General's CAAC reports, perspective of listing and delisting under sanctions regimes, arms embargoes, etc. Life would have been much worse without the laws of war and POC and IHL. So taking a moment to appreciate, with its imperfections, it has actually saved a lot of lives. But
lives have been saved, and you can't forget that. And as a result, we must recognize that as bad as things are, things could be worse if we kind of allow these tools to further deteriorate in some way. And I was struck by Hisham's point that if you can't fix your windows, don't blame the tools. And so, but I want to ask like one general question to the group before we come to the audience, and it's about where we go from here, and it is the member state's responsibility. We're all very, very clear on that, and it reminds me though of some of the debates around Letitia, you mentioned the Security Council Resolution 2286. And when that came out, there was some concern from some humanitarians that, well, why do we need another resolution for this? We know member states shouldn't be attacking medical care workers. So we want to remind member states of their responsibility. But if if member states are saying, well, yes, we accept this responsibility, but we have this other interpretation of IHL, where does that leave us? And what are some of the legal and tools of accountability that we can pursue in order to advance compliance? One question I think that hasn't exactly come up, but that has been sort of below the surface here, I think, is it comes to some degree around distinctions between civilians and military, and targets and actors. And you know, this is not my expertise, this is much more your expertise, but it seems to me, you know, when we're talking about the context that we're in, there's a real blurring line there. Even within the homes, that you feel like even with one family. Is there a way in which we can both legally and institutionally firm up how that distinction should and would be made? Or is, I think, this point that you make at the end, you know, about advancing, that it's not just about complying with your understanding of IHL, but taking a look, a very objective look, and saying, civilians are dying. And it's not just your obligation to comply with some sort of understanding of IHL, but it is your obligation to ensure that mass civilian casualties don't result from your military strategy. So not just how do you comply, but how do you minimize civilian harm, which seems to me going one step further. Is that a question that makes sense to the group in any way? Whatever. Would anybody like to jump in on that before we go to the floor?
In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, and all around. It will be same approach or different approach. Same judgment, not different judgment. And even not only in this particularly controversial cases, in Africa.
Clear, I don't think the conversation has been specifically focused on Gaza at all. Not multiple other cases have been mentioned.
So in other cases,
we're in agreement. This is not a conversation specifically about Gaza, but about the trend in IHL that we're seeing over the last 20 years. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, here.
Civilians are everybody who's not a member of the fighting forces, but we know that it's also quite complex and gets into some contentious areas of interpretation about direct participation in hostilities and how you determine membership in a non-state armed group. But if you take that complexity and just allow it to cloud vision, eventually everybody starts to look like a member of the fighting forces, and there are fewer and fewer civilians to protect. So some thoughts on that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks.
Actually, so I'm pretty young, and you know, as an aspiring IHL lawyer, I would say, how are member states, you know, finding that balance between a moral compass and, you know, military tactic? Like, as a young professional, I feel like I've lost hope, and as the panel has stated, you know, there doesn't seem to be any compassion or humanity in the world anymore. So how are we going to move forward and create a world where everyone is, you know, safe, not just the wealthy or the rich, but everyone?
The legal proceedings before the ICJ. And we've seen the damage to some extent to the ICC. It remains to be seen, given the events of today, how that will necessarily play out. But for those of us, for advocates, for practitioners, for supporters of international law, or even aspiring young lawyers, how do we respond to that? How do we respond to that challenge?
Excellent. Thank you. Come back to the panel, and then we'll have
protection of military in certain circumstances, so they would have more information, or they would feel more protected, and then they could perform better to protect civilians. Otherwise, they were not sure whether that, you know, when they see a civilian, they are not sure is true civilian or not, or some combatant in or bad guy undercover civilian using having a benefit of, you know, civilian to attack the military. So in IHL or any legal venue could address this point. If those kind of action could be considered illegal, and then they shouldn't be protected. Thank you.
The POC agenda is the political reflection of IHL rules designed to protect civilians, further reinforced by international human rights and refugee law. And for this year's 75th anniversary of the Geneva Convention, my country is organizing a commemoration in August in Geneva. We really want to strengthen the political momentum, have more discussions like this, and really give responsibilities back where they should be. It's high time to uphold the continued relevance of these conventions and call for their political reappropriation to guarantee the effectiveness of IHA in the future. Universally ratified, the conventions represent a unique commitment in the name of our common humanity. And I would like to stop here and thank so much the fantastic panelists and also Adam as a moderator of that very powerful ladies and the gentlemen. I think I could stop with what Adam said, while saying also there is a poet I always think of perfect as there is no perfect life in an imperfect world. I think it's important. But still, there I would be with Adam saying our obligation is to at least try and try harder to speak the truth no matter what. So that's what I wanted to end with. Thank you very much, and have a very relevant POC week and help us make POC more relevant also in the Security Council. Thank you so much.